Right now, you are probably listening to this while doing something else entirely,
Oh, almost certainly.
right? Like maybe you're driving to work, or maybe you're folding laundry, or maybe, and let's be totally honest here, you have this playing in a background tab while you're
Ah.
periodically checking your email or, refreshing a Slack channel, scrolling through a news feed.
Just doing the modern office shuffle.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it feels like harmless multitasking, right? It feels like you're just being an efficient, modern professional.
But it's actually incredibly destructive.
Yeah, because according to a really terrifying body of research out of Stanford University, that exact habit, just that constant low-level fracturing of your attention, is slowly making you what researchers literally call a mental wreck.
It's a harsh term, but it's medically accurate.
Right. It is permanently destroying your brain's ability to learn the exact skills that will keep you employed, 5, 10, or 20 years from now. So, welcome to the deep dive.
It's a tough reality to confront right at the start, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
But, I mean, it's the absolute truth. We live in a world that practically demands we fracture our attention constantly, yet the economic rewards are rapidly shifting away from the people who actually succumb to that demand.
And that is exactly our mission today. We're taking the core concepts from Cal Newport's groundbreaking work, Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World, and we're going to explore a very, very specific roadmap for you.
A roadmap that is honestly crucial right now.
Yeah, we're looking at exactly how early career professionals, so you, listening right now, can actively train your capacity for absolute focus.
Because it really is a muscle you have to train.
Right. We're going to deconstruct how to use a concept called strategic isolation to master difficult, highly technical skills way faster than your competition.
Because right now, the ability to focus without distraction, it isn't just like a nice productivity hack to get you home by 5:00 p.m.
No, not at all.
It is a rare, almost superpower-like skill. I mean, it is the ultimate competitive advantage in the modern economy.
So to really understand why it's a superpower, let's unpack this. We need to be incredibly precise about what we mean, because people throw around the word focus all the time.
Right, I'm focusing on my emails.
Exactly. But Newport defines deep work with scientific precision.
He does. He refers to professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their absolute limit.
Their absolute limit.
Yeah. And these efforts create new value, they improve your skill, and this is really the most critical part, they are hard to replicate.
Hard to replicate. I feel like that phrase is the entire ballgame.
It really is.
Because if we contrast deep work with what Newport calls shallow work, the distinction becomes painfully clear to anyone who's ever worked in an office.
Oh, painfully clear.
Think about your typical Tuesday morning, right? Shallow work consists of those non-cognitively demanding logistical-style tasks.
The things you almost always perform while you are partially distracted. Right. It's spending 2 hours acting like a human network router, just forwarding emails and saying, hey, what do you think about this?
Or tweaking the font size on a PowerPoint slide for 30 minutes.
Oh, man, guilty. Or it's sitting in a weekly status update meeting where you don't actually contribute anything, but you politely nod so your boss sees your face.
Yeah, exactly. Shallow work does not push your cognitive capabilities to the limit. It doesn't create new, unique value.
Right.
And most importantly, it is incredibly easy to replicate. I mean, almost anyone can be trained to forward emails or format a slide deck.
So the profound danger here is that modern knowledge workers are increasingly replacing deep work with the shallow alternative.
And the neurological evidence strongly suggests that this shift isn't just, a bad habit that you can snap out of when you need to.
Wait, really? It's not just a habit.
No.
Hmm.
If you spend enough time in a state of frenetic shallowness, you actually rewire your brain. You permanently reduce your capacity to perform deep work at all. Wow, so you basically lose the ability to sprint because you've spent years just shuffling your feet around the office.
That's a great way to put it.
But let's ground this in the real world. Why does this matter to your career right now? Like, if you're an early career professional trying to climb the ladder, why should you care if your work is deep or shallow as long as you're getting your paycheck?
Well, we have to zoom out and look at the actual economic playing field you are standing on right now.
Sorry.
Economists Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee, they've identified this massive macroeconomic shift that they call the Great Restructuring.
The Great Restructuring. Sounds ominous.
It kind of is. They argue that our technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, global networking, are racing ahead at an exponential rate. But human skills and corporate organizations are really lagging behind.
So as intelligent machines improve, the labor market isn't just taking a dip, it is fundamentally dividing.
Exactly. We are rapidly reaching a point where employers are becoming increasingly likely to hire new machines instead of new people.
Right? And even when a human is needed, remote collaboration technology means companies they no longer have to settle for the best person within a 20-mile radius of their office building.
Why would they? They can just outsource the job to the absolute best person on the planet.
Which leaves local average talent completely underemployed. I mean, it sounds incredibly grim, like we're all just sitting around waiting to be replaced by an algorithm.
It does sound grim if you're stuck in the shallows. But the Great Restructuring is not universally bad news.
Okay, good.
Brynjolfsson and McAfee point out that this dividing market is actually creating unprecedented opportunities for three very specific groups of people.
And these groups are poised to not just survive the restructuring, but to completely thrive.
Yeah, they will reap a massively disproportionate amount of the economic rewards.
So let's walk through these three winning groups, because you, listening right now, you need to figure out how to force your way into one of them. What's the first group?
The first group is the high-skilled workers. These are the individuals who have the cognitive capacity to work creatively and effectively with complex, intelligent machines.
Do we have an example of that?
Yeah, a brilliant example is the statistician Nate Silver.
Oh, right, the election guy.
Exactly. When he built his reputation for predicting election outcomes with astonishing accuracy, he didn't just type "who will win the election" into Google.
Right.
He was using incredibly complex tools. He used SQL databases to query massive, messy sets of polling data. He used a statistical analysis system called Stata, and he ran Monte Carlo simulations.
Let's pause on that, because those aren't just like tech buzzwords. A Monte Carlo simulation isn't a simple math equation you just scratch out on a notepad.
No, not at all.
It's a complex computational algorithm that relies on repeated random sampling to calculate varying probabilities. It forces a computer to effectively run tens of thousands of hypothetical elections.
Factoring in margins of error across hundreds of different polls, yeah.
And you cannot learn how to architect that kind of statistical model while your brain is constantly context switching to check a Slack notification.
No, it's impossible.
It demands absolute, sustained cognitive load.
Precisely. The machines weren't an obstacle for Nate Silver. They were his precondition for success. But to use them, he had to possess the deep focus required to actually master them.
So that's the high-skilled workers.
Yeah.
What's the second winning group?
The second group is the superstars. These are the absolute best in their respective fields.
Okay, like who?
Think of David Heinemeier Hansson. He's the ace programmer who created the Ruby on Rails development framework.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's huge.
Right. Because of high-speed networks, it no longer makes economic sense for a company in Chicago to hire a mediocre local programmer when they can pay a superstar like Hansson, who might be working remotely from Spain, to do it flawlessly and efficiently.
So we are living in what economists call a winner-take-all market.
Exactly. If the consumer or the employer has access to all performers globally, they will always choose the absolute best.
And then there's the third group, the owners.
Yes.
These are the people with capital to invest in the new technologies driving this restructuring. Think of venture capitalists who fund the AI startups.
Right. In the digital age, a company can be sold for $1 billion while employing only a dozen people. The proportion of rewards returning to the people who actually own the machines is totally unprecedented.
But let's be brutally honest here with our listener. You probably don't have $1 billion of venture capital lying around in a checking account to become an owner tomorrow morning.
Most of us don't, yeah.
So if you want to accelerate your career and avoid being automated or outsourced, you have to join one of those first two accessible groups, the high-skilled workers or the superstars.
And to do that, you need two very specific core abilities.
Because the barrier to entry for those groups is steep.
It is. First, you need the ability to quickly master hard things. Intelligent machines and the systems that run our world are incredibly complex, and they change at a breakneck pace.
Right. If you can't learn rapidly, you will just be left behind.
Exactly. And second, you need the ability to produce at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed.
So it wasn't enough for Nate Silver to just learn how Stata works.
No, he had to actually produce forecasts that millions of people valued, and he had to do it before the election actually happened. If you don't produce, you won't thrive, no matter how much raw talent you possess.
This brings us to a story that I think is the absolute most relatable, visceral example of exactly how an early career professional can execute this.
Jason Ben's story.
Yes. Jason's situation is going to sound painfully familiar to a lot of people listening. He was working as a financial consultant, making about $40,000 a year, and he realized his job was essentially acting as a human spreadsheet.
Which is soul-crushing.
Completely. He was sitting under fluorescent lights, spending up to 6 hours a day manually manipulating data, just copying and pasting cells to generate routine financial reports.
And what's fascinating is that Ben wasn't lacking intelligence at all. I mean, he had an economics degree from an elite university.
Right.
But he looked at his day-to-day reality and realized that his core professional output could be entirely automated by a well-written Excel macro.
Wait, didn't he actually write the macro?
He did. He actually taught himself enough basic coding to write a script that reduced his 6-hour manual data entry slog down to a single button click.
That's amazing.
It took the computer less than an hour to do what used to take him all day.
Now, a lot of people would just take that victory, keep their mouths shut, and spend the next 5 hours of their workday browsing the internet while collecting their salary.
Most people would, yeah.
But Ben had this terrifying epiphany. He looked at that macro and realized, I am not valuable in this new economy.
Yeah.
Like, if a simple script can do my job, how long until the company realizes it too? He knew he needed to learn a truly hard, complex technical skill to accelerate his career and secure his future.
So he decided he was going to quit his job and become a computer programmer.
But when he actually quit and moved back home to teach himself how to code, he ran headfirst into a massive psychological wall.
He suffered from the exact problem we outlined at the beginning of this deep dive.
He was completely addicted to distraction.
Totally addicted. He later admitted that he was compulsively getting on the internet, checking his email, scrolling social media.
At his old job, he once tried to read some business plans to educate himself, and he realized he spent 98% of his time just surfing the web.
Because he physically and mentally could not sustain focus on the dense text. His brain was totally untrained. He lacked the capacity for deep work.
So picture this. He's sitting in his room, unemployed, staring at highly complex computer science concepts, and his brain is just screaming at him to check his phone.
It's a nightmare scenario.
How did he fix it? Because he couldn't just tell himself to try harder. Like, willpower doesn't work like that.
No, willpower is finite. He fixed it through a method called strategic isolation.
Strategic isolation.
Yeah. Ben realized he was fighting a two-front war. He had to learn the incredibly complex syntax of computer programming, but simultaneously he had to teach his broken mind how to concentrate again.
So his solution was pretty drastic.
Very drastic. He locked himself in a room with absolutely no computer. None.
Think about the absolute irony of that. He is trying to learn computer programming, and he removes the computer from the room because the machine itself is too much of a distraction for his severely untrained brain.
It sounds crazy, but it was the only way. He stripped his environment down to textbooks, blank note cards, and a highlighter.
That's it.
That's it. He would read the dense programming textbooks, highlight the core logic and syntax, transfer those concepts to the note cards, and then literally practice reciting and explaining the code out loud to an empty room.
The psychological agony of those first few weeks must have been intense.
Oh, unbearable.
Because your brain is starved for the dopamine hits of novelty it's used to getting from the internet, and instead you're forcing it to chew on dry, complex logic loops.
It was incredibly difficult, but by completely removing the option of distraction, he forced his brain to adapt.
He was systematically performing concentration calisthenics.
Exactly. He was training his focus muscle. Day by day, the agony lessened. He got better at holding his attention on the abstract concepts.
And eventually, he built his endurance up to the point where he could sit in that room and clock 5 or more disconnected, perfectly distraction-free hours per day.
Which is huge. He read roughly 18 dense textbooks on programming this way.
And the payoff for that absolute dedication to deep work was staggering. Because once he had the baseline knowledge and, more importantly, the baseline focus, he enrolled in Dev Bootcamp.
Right, which is not easy.
No, it's a notoriously brutal 100-hour-a-week crash course designed to turn people into software developers.
But because Ben had spent months honing his ability to go deep, he didn't struggle with the cognitive load.
Right. While his peers were drowning in the complexity and getting distracted by the frustration, Ben absolutely crushed the curriculum.
He became the top student in his cohort.
And just half a year after quitting his $40,000 a year human spreadsheet job, he landed a position as a core developer at a San Francisco tech startup.
Guess what his starting salary was?
$100,000 a year.
Incredible.
By training his focus and mastering a hard skill, he literally rewired his brain and accelerated his career at a terrifying speed.
It really is a perfect case study.
Okay, that is an incredible success story. But I have to push back here, because if I'm listening to this, I'm immediately thinking of the exceptions.
Okay, let's hear them.
We are sitting here preaching the absolute non-negotiable necessity of isolation and deep focus to be successful in the modern business world.
Yes.
But what about the executives? What about someone like Jack Dorsey? During his peak, he was running both Twitter and Square simultaneously.
He was.
He famously worked at stand-up desks in the middle of the office floor, specifically so his employees could constantly interrupt him. He bounced between 30 or 40 rapid-fire meetings a day.
His attention was completely fractured by design.
Exactly. Yet he built billion-dollar companies. So how is he so successful without deep work? Because if I ignore my boss on Slack for 4 hours to go do deep work like Jason Ben, I'm not going to get a $100,000 job. I'm going to get fired.
Yeah.
How does this actually survive contact with reality?
That is the highly practical pushback, and Newport actually explicitly addresses what he calls the Jack Dorsey exception.
Okay, so there is an exception.
Yes, but it's very specific. High-level corporate executives, like CEOs of major companies, they operate in a fundamentally different economic category than the rest of us.
How so?
A good CEO is essentially a highly calibrated, hard-to-automate decision engine.
Not a decision engine.
Yeah. They have spent decades building up a massive repository of market experience and honing their instincts. Their specific value to the company does not come from locking themselves in a room to write code or draft a strategy document.
Well.
Their value comes from being presented with constant inputs all day long, emails, urgent meetings, quick pitches from department heads, and processing those inputs rapidly to make final, high-stakes decisions.
So asking a CEO to isolate themselves for 4 hours to think deeply about one specific coding problem is actually a gross waste of their value.
Exactly. They are the router. They should be hiring 3 brilliant, deeply focused subordinates to do the complex deep work and bring them the distilled solutions to actually decide on.
But here's a critical takeaway for you, the early career professional listening right now.
Yeah.
Unless you are the CEO of a billion-dollar company whose sole job is to act as a rapid-fire decision engine, copying Jack Dorsey's distracted schedule is a recipe for absolute mediocrity.
It will destroy your career.
Because if you are a junior developer, a marketer, a financial analyst, or a writer, your job is not to make rapid-fire decisions based on decades of instinct. Your job is to build complex skills and produce high-quality output.
And the behaviors that make a CEO successful will actively destroy your ability to master hard things.
Okay, so if you are in the phase of your career where you need to be building those skills, you have to operate like Jason Ben. But I want to look under the hood here. Because if Jason Ben could literally transform his earning potential and his cognitive capacity by staring at note cards in an empty room, there has to be a physical, biological mechanism making that possible.
Oh, there absolutely is.
We aren't just talking about a self-help mantra. We are talking about changing the physical structure of the human brain.
We absolutely are. To understand the biology of mastery, we really have to look at the research of psychologist Anders Ericsson.
He pioneered the concept of deliberate practice, right?
He did. Ericsson found that to truly master a hard skill, you must focus tightly on a specific idea or physical movement, and you must receive continuous feedback so you can correct your approach.
But neurologically, when you do that, what is actually happening inside your skull?
It all comes down to a substance called myelin.
Myelin. This is the biological holy grail of talent and skill acquisition, isn't it?
It really is. Myelin is a layer of fatty tissue that grows around our neurons. Think of a neuron like an electrical wire in your house. If that wire is bare, the electrical signal can leak out. It travels slowly and inefficiently.
Right.
Myelin acts like the thick rubber insulation around that wire. It prevents the electrical impulses from leaking, allowing the neurons to fire faster, cleaner, and with far less energy expenditure.
Wow. So every single skill you possess, whether it's hitting a perfectly timed tennis serve, speaking a foreign language, or, writing an elegant Monte Carlo simulation in SQL, ultimately reduces down to a specific circuit of neurons firing in your brain.
Exactly. And the new science of performance argues that you get better at a skill as you develop thicker myelin around the relevant neurons in that specific circuit.
So to be truly great at something is simply to be heavily myelinated.
That's the biological truth. Yeah.
This is where the biological necessity of deep work becomes undeniably clear. Because how do you trigger your brain to build that myelin? You can't just drink a protein shake and hope it goes to the right place.
No, the mechanism is highly specific. When you focus intensely on one specific skill in absolute isolation, you are forcing that exact neural circuit to fire again and again in isolation.
Right.
This repetitive, highly targeted use of an isolated circuit triggers specialized cells in your brain called oligodendrocytes.
Oligodendrocytes?
Yeah, they act like microscopic biological wrappers. When they sense a circuit firing intensely and exclusively, they begin wrapping layers of myelin around those exact neurons, effectively cementing the skill into your brain's hardware.
And this perfectly explains the biological devastation of distraction.
It does.
Because let's say you were trying to learn a complex new coding language, but you also have your email open on a second monitor, and you're periodically checking a group text on your phone. Neurologically, what are you doing?
You are firing the coding circuit, but you're also firing the social anxiety circuit, the email processing circuit, the visual novelty circuit.
You are firing dozens of different neural pathways simultaneously and haphazardly.
Exactly. And because the firing is so diffuse, you fail to isolate the specific group of neurons you actually want to strengthen.
So the oligodendrocytes don't receive a clear signal of which circuit is important, so they just don't wrap the myelin.
By multitasking, you are physically preventing your brain from locking in the new skill.
That is the biological reality. Deep work is not a preference. It is a physiological requirement.
To learn hard things quickly, you must focus intensely without distraction. It is literally the only way to trigger the myelination process.
Okay, so myelin is the hardware. It's the physical insulation of the brain. But what about the software? What about the psychology of our day-to-day production?
That's the other half of the equation.
Because even if I understand the biology, I still have to survive my workday. This brings us to a concept introduced by business professor Sophie Leroy called attention residue.
A brilliant concept.
And I think this concept explains why you all feel so totally exhausted by 2:00 p.m. every day.
It absolutely does. Leroy was looking at how modern knowledge workers actually operate. Very few people truly multitask, meaning doing two complex things at the exact same literal second.
Right. Usually we work sequentially. We rapid switch.
Exactly. You go from drafting a proposal to sitting in a 30-minute meeting, back to the proposal, over to your inbox for 5 minutes, and then back to the proposal.
And Leroy's research asked a really profound question. When you switch from task A to task B, does your attention cleanly follow you?
And the answer is a resounding no.
Is attention residue essentially like having too many heavy software applications open on your laptop?
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like, when you have a massive video rendering in the background and then you try to type a simple email, but the RAM is so drained that your keyboard lags and the screen freezes? Is that what we are doing to our brains?
That is a perfect, highly accurate analogy. Leroy actually designed an ingenious experiment to prove this.
What did she do?
She had participants work on a specific task, like reviewing a set of resumes. Then she abruptly interrupted them and forced them to switch to a completely different task, a lexical decision game.
Let's explain that game, because it proves how deep this goes. A lexical decision game is where a string of letters flashes on a screen, and you have to instantly determine if it's a real English word or just gibberish.
Right. It measures raw cognitive processing speed.
And what did she find?
What Leroy found was shocking. The participants who were interrupted while reviewing resumes performed terribly on the lexical decision game.
Why?
Because a significant portion of their attention was still stuck thinking about the resumes. A residue of their attention remained trapped on the previous task.
Wow.
And the thicker the residue, the slower and more error-prone their brain became on the new task.
And here is the terrifying part for anyone working in a modern office. Even a quick glance at your inbox introduces a massive amount of attention residue.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's say you're writing a complex report, and you just quickly check your email. You see a message from your boss that you can't deal with right now. You go back to the report. But part of your brain is now subconsciously looping, trying to process what that email meant and how you will reply later.
Your cognitive RAM is drained, severely dampening your performance on the report.
So if you are the kind of person who glances at your phone or your Slack channel every 10 or 15 minutes, you are existing in a permanent baseline state of high attention residue.
You are literally never giving your brain the RAM it needs to perform at its peak.
You are operating at a fraction of your actual intelligence.
Which is why the most elite producers in the world go to extreme lengths to eliminate residue. The sources provide a brilliant case study of this with Adam Grant.
The Wharton professor.
Right. At the time Newport's book was written, Grant was the youngest full professor at the Wharton School of Business. And he produced peer-reviewed academic papers at an absurdly high rate, far outpacing his older, more experienced colleagues.
How did he do it?
Extreme batching.
He didn't just batch his tasks for the afternoon, he batched his entire year.
Exactly. Grant treats his attention as a highly guarded resource. On a macro scale, he stacked all of his teaching obligations into the fall semester. During those months, he was fully available to his students.
But in the spring and summer, he shifted entirely to research, isolating himself completely.
But it's his micro-level batching that is truly extreme. When he is in research mode, he will isolate himself for 3 or 4 days at a time to focus solely on writing one specific paper. He refuses to context switch.
And my absolute favorite detail about Adam Grant is that during these multi-day research sprints, he would actually turn on his out-of-office autoresponder on his email, even though he was physically sitting right there in his office on campus.
Yeah, his colleagues would walk by, look through the window, see him typing, and say, "Adam, I just got an out-of-office reply from you, but you're right there."
It seems antisocial, but Grant understood the devastating math of attention residue.
He knew that even opening his door to quickly explain to a colleague, "Hey, I can't talk right now, I'm writing," would force his brain to context switch, introducing attention residue that could derail his cognitive momentum for the next hour.
He preferred to look a little eccentric rather than sacrifice his focus.
And this leads us to the fundamental productivity formula that underscores everything we're talking about today.
Let's hear it.
It's a simple equation. High-quality work produced equals time spent multiplied by the intensity of focus.
Okay, so if your intensity of focus is constantly diluted by attention residue from Slack, email, and social media, you have to spend exponentially more time to produce the same quality of work.
By maximizing his intensity, Adam Grant maximizes the results he produces per unit of time.
Okay, so let's synthesize where we are. We know why deep work is economically vital. It keeps you from being automated or outsourced.
Right.
We know the biology of how myelin physically cements new skills into your brain. And we know the psychology of how attention residue destroys your cognitive RAM.
The theory is airtight.
But let's get ruthlessly practical. How do you, the listener, sitting at a desk, in a noisy open-plan office, or working remotely from a cluttered kitchen table while your dog barks, actually structure your life to get this intense focus?
We need to move from the science of focus to the architectural blueprints of a deep work lifestyle.
Yes. To execute strategic isolation consistently, you cannot just rely on good intentions. You have to design a deep work philosophy.
To illustrate the ideal scenario, Newport mentions a fascinating architectural concept designed by David Duane called the eudaimonia machine.
Oh, I am obsessed with this idea. It's a literal physical building designed from the ground up to cultivate pure human flourishing and deep work.
It's amazing.
You don't just walk into an office, you progress through a series of 5 specific rooms. You start in a gallery showcasing great work to inspire you, then a salon where you can debate ideas over coffee, then a library containing the collected knowledge of your field, then a standard office room for your shallow work answering emails, making calls.
And finally, at the very back of the building, protected by soundproof walls, you enter the deep work chamber.
A space utterly devoid of distraction where your only option is to do the work.
It's a beautiful architectural translation of the neuroscience we just discussed. It literally strips away attention residue room by room.
But of course, the reality is that you, our listener, cannot hire an architect to build a personal eudaimonia machine tomorrow.
No, probably not.
Therefore, you need a personal scheduling philosophy to simulate the effects of that building in your normal life.
Because if you attempt to schedule deep work in an ad hoc fashion like waking up and just hoping you'll magically find 2 hours of uninterrupted time today, you will fail.
Your day will just be devoured by the urgent demands of others.
Exactly. The text outlines 4 distinct approaches to scheduling deep work. Finding the one that fits your career is the first step to execution.
Let's break those down because this is where the rubber meets the road. The first philosophy is the monastic philosophy.
This is the most extreme and austere approach. Think of the legendary computer scientist Donald Knuth.
Okay.
The monastic philosophy attempts to maximize deep efforts by completely eliminating or radically minimizing all shallow obligations from your life.
Like all of them.
All of them. Knuth's singular professional goal is to learn areas of computer science exhaustively and write the definitive textbooks on them. To achieve that, he doesn't have a Twitter account. He doesn't casually answer emails. In fact, he essentially doesn't use email at all.
How does anyone reach him?
His physical mailing address is managed by an assistant who batches his mail for him to look at once every few months.
Wow.
He cuts out every single activity that does not directly contribute to his singular, deeply focused goal.
It's an incredibly powerful way to produce historic work. But let's be real. If you are a 28-year-old marketing manager, you cannot tell your boss you are adopting the monastic philosophy and will now only receive physical mail once a quarter.
No, you will be fired immediately.
So for the vast majority of us, we need to look at the second option, the bimodal philosophy.
This philosophy is heavily utilized by academics and creators. We can look at the famous psychologist Carl Jung as the prime example.
Okay, how did he do it?
Jung recognized the need for intense isolation, so he literally built a stone tower in the woods of Bollingen, Switzerland. But he didn't live there full time. He divided his time into two distinct modes.
Oh, bimodal.
Right. During his deep stretches, which he dictated had to be at least a full day, if not weeks long, he retreated to his tower and acted monastically. No interruptions, just the deep work of writing the theories that would eventually challenge Sigmund Freud.
But when that bimodal stretch was over,
He would return to his clinical practice and the bustling coffeehouse scene in Zurich to handle his shallow work, see patients, and engage socially.
so the bimodal approach is about taking clear, massive chunks of time, a 4-day weekend, a 2-week retreat, or even just dedicating every Tuesday and Thursday entirely to deep work and then being fully available the rest of the time. But again, what if your job requires you to be reasonably accessible every single day? What if you can't vanish for a week or even a full day?
That brings us to the third and probably most universally applicable approach, the rhythmic philosophy.
I love this one.
For standard corporate workers, the rhythmic philosophy is often the most successful. This approach argues that the easiest way to consistently achieve deep work is to transform it into a simple, non-negotiable daily habit.
By scheduling it at the exact same time every day.
Yes, you completely remove the friction of having to decide when to work deeply. You don't expend willpower making a choice. You just execute the rhythm.
The sources give a great example of a guy named Brian Chappell. He was a doctoral candidate trying to write his dissertation, but he also had a demanding full-time job and a newborn baby at home.
He definitely didn't have the luxury of retreating to a Swiss stone tower.
No. So he adopted a brutal but effective rhythm. He worked on his dissertation every single weekday morning from 5:00 to 7:30 a.m. before his baby woke up and before his standard workday even began.
And he did it relentlessly. This is often associated with the chain method, famously popularized by the comedian Jerry Seinfeld.
Oh, right, the calendar thing.
Yeah. Seinfeld used a giant wall calendar, and every day he successfully wrote new material. He drew a big red X over that day. After a few days, you have a chain. At that point, your only psychological job is to not break the chain.
The rhythmic philosophy is brilliant because it guarantees that you are accumulating highly myelinated depth over the course of a year without requiring you to disappear from your colleagues during core business hours.
Which leaves us with the fourth and final approach, the journalistic philosophy.
Named after journalists, I see.
They're like Walter Isaacson. Due to the chaotic nature of breaking news, journalists develop the ability to shift into a deep writing mode on a moment's notice. They squeeze depth into any available pocket of free time.
Isaacson famously wrote a massive, incredibly dense 864-page book on the side while simultaneously ascending the executive ranks at Time magazine.
Which is insane.
How did he do it?
By dropping into intense, deep work whenever an afternoon meeting was abruptly canceled, or if he had a spare 45 minutes before flight, he could instantly pivot from a chaotic newsroom environment into absolute isolated focus.
But, and this is a massive flashing neon warning sign, the sources are very clear that the journalistic approach is incredibly dangerous for beginners.
It absolutely is. Do not attempt the journalistic philosophy if you are just starting to build your deep work habits.
Why not?
Because transitioning your brain from shallow distraction to deep focus requires a massive expenditure of willpower. If your focus muscle is weak and you suddenly find yourself with a free hour and try to just drop into deep work on a whim, your brain will rebel.
You'll just sit there staring at a blank screen.
You will deplete your willpower within 5 minutes, and you'll end up spending that hour scrolling social media instead. Isaacson could do it because he had spent decades as a professional writer, heavily violating his ability to switch modes.
Right. And speaking of willpower, we need to address that directly. You cannot just rely on sheer grit and willpower to force yourself to focus.
Willpower is not a limitless well you can draw from.
No. The psychologist Roy Baumeister has exhaustively studied this concept, known as ego depletion. Your willpower is a finite biological resource.
Every time you resist checking your phone, every time you force yourself to read a difficult paragraph, you are draining the tank.
If you rely on willpower alone to execute your deep work philosophy, you will literally burn out by Tuesday. To conserve willpower, you have to ritualize your deep work.
You need strict, deeply ingrained routines so that entering a state of focus becomes automatic rather than a grueling choice.
So to build your ritual, you need to answer 3 highly specific questions.
First, where will you work and for how long? You need a location that is completely separate from your normal shallow work. Maybe it's a specific conference room in your office where you put a do not disturb sign on the door, or maybe it's a specific library desk.
Second, how will you work once you start? You need rigid rules. Will your phone be powered off and in another room? Will you use an internet blocker on your laptop? Will you measure your success by a metric like words produced per hour to keep your brain engaged?
And third,
Yeah.
how will you support your work? Do you need a specific type of coffee ready? Do you need all your research files organized into one folder the night before?
Systematize every detail so that when it's time to work, you minimize all friction.
Remove the friction so the focus happens naturally.
I love that. And there's another fascinating psychological lever you can pull to jumpstart this process, which Newport calls the grand gesture.
Oh, this is fun.
Sometimes, to convince your own brain that a task is truly important, you have to do something radical. Think about J.K. Rowling. When she was struggling to finish the final Harry Potter book, she was constantly distracted by her bustling home life.
So what did she do?
She booked a suite in the incredibly expensive, luxurious Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh, right next to a castle. Or think of Bill Gates famously taking his Think Weeks, where he would fly away to a secluded lakeside cabin completely alone just to read papers and think about the future of technology.
The underlying psychology of the grand gesture is brilliant. By investing significant time, money, or effort to change your environment, you attach a massive psychological weight to the task.
Right. When J.K. Rowling is sitting in a hotel room that costs $1,000 a night, her brain recognizes the financial stakes.
It overrides the urge to procrastinate because the environment itself screams, "This is important. You better focus."
It's a powerful hack. But before we move on, I want to clarify a critical nuance about all this isolation. Because when we say strategic isolation, it conjures an image of a lone genius locking themselves in a dark closet for months on end.
But isolation doesn't always mean being strictly physically alone. The sources explore a concept called collaborative deep work, and it's vital for people who work in teams.
Right, the whiteboard effect.
A perfect historical example of this is Bell Labs, the legendary research facility where the transistor was invented. The architecture of Bell Labs utilized a hub-and-spoke model.
How did that work?
The researchers had long hallways with isolated soundproof offices, the spokes, where they could do their solo deep work. But those hallways all funneled into shared common areas, the hubs designed for serendipitous encounters.
And what did they find?
They found that sometimes the deepest breakthroughs didn't happen in the solo offices. They happened when 2 experts engaged in collaborative deep work at a shared whiteboard.
So 2 people totally focused on a single problem, pushing each other to deeper levels of insight than either could reach alone?
Exactly. When you're working on a deeply complex problem alone, your brain naturally wants to avoid the cognitive strain. It wants to quit.
But if you have a brilliant colleague standing next to you at a whiteboard, waiting for your next insight, their presence acts as a social pressure that short-circuits your instinct to give up.
You feed off each other's focus. So strategic isolation is about isolating yourself from distraction and shallow interruptions, not necessarily from highly focused, relevant collaboration.
That is a crucial distinction. Okay, so we've designed our eudaimonia-inspired philosophy. We've virtualized our workspace. We've maybe even booked a hotel room for a grand gesture. We sit down to work.
But here is the harsh, terrifying reality.
Oh, no.
Even with the perfect setup, if your brain is thoroughly addicted to digital distraction, you will still fail.
You will sit in that fancy hotel room and stare blankly at the wall.
Or worse, you'll end up scrolling social media on your phone anyway.
This brings us to the most vital part of today's deep dive. How do we actively train the brain to tolerate the sheer discomfort of boredom? How do early career professionals actually build the focus muscle that Jason Ben built?
We have to start by dismantling what researchers call the myth of the switch.
The myth of the switch.
Yes. There is a pervasive, arrogant belief among modern workers that they can spend 95% of their day in a state of hyper-distracted, multitasking, swiping, clicking, watching videos while answering emails. And then, when it's time to do something hard, they can simply flip a mental switch and achieve laser focus.
I work best under pressure. Right. That's what everyone always says.
And it is biologically false. The late Stanford professor Clifford Nass studied the cognitive impacts of heavy multitasking extensively.
What did he find?
His findings were uncompromising. He discovered that people who constantly multitask do not just form a bad habit, they fundamentally degrade their brain's operational capacity.
They lose the ability to filter out irrelevant information.
They permanently damage their working memory. Nass bluntly referred to chronic multitaskers as mental wrecks.
Mental wrecks?
They have developed habits of mind that make it physiologically impossible to be laser-focused, even when they desperately want to be. They become, in his words, suckers for irrelevancy.
Suckers for irrelevancy. That is a chilling phrase. So if you are listening to this and realizing, oh no, I am a mental wreck, I can't read a book for 10 minutes without reaching for my phone, how do you rehabilitate your brain?
How do you rebuild the myelin?
Exactly. The sources provide 4 highly actionable, albeit challenging, training strategies. And strategy 1 is totally counterintuitive. It's not about taking a digital detox weekend. It's about scheduling internet blocks.
A lot of people try the digital detox. They go to a cabin without their phone for a weekend expecting to be cured.
But Newport argues that a digital detox is like a crash diet. It might feel good for a day, but it doesn't rewire your baseline nutritional habits so you immediately relapse.
Instead, you need to change your daily relationship with distraction. The strategy of scheduling internet blocks asks you to do the opposite of what you'd expect. Don't schedule breaks from distraction so you can focus. Schedule breaks from focus so you can be distracted.
Explain how that actually works in practice, because it sounds strange.
You keep a notepad next to your computer, and you explicitly schedule the specific times you are allowed to use the internet or check your phone. For example, you write down, next internet use, 10:30 a.m.
Okay.
Outside of those specific predetermined blocks, absolutely no connectivity is allowed. 0.
Okay, let's play this out. I'm writing a proposal. It's 10:00 a.m. My next internet block is until 10:38. But while I'm writing, I realize I desperately need to look up a specific statistic on Google to finish my sentence.
Right.
If I don't look it up, I'm stuck. What do? Do I just break the rule for 5 seconds to get the data?
No.
You wait.
You just wait.
And that moment, that exact moment of friction, is the entire point of the exercise. If you give in and jump online to grab that quick statistic, you are reinforcing the deeply ingrained neural pathway that teaches your brain, whenever I feel stuck, bored, or face a cognitive challenge, I get an immediate hit of digital novelty.
Ah, I see. By forcing yourself to wait, you must either skip the statistic and keep writing the rest of the proposal, or simply sit there and endure the frustration. By doing this, you are performing concentration calisthenics. You are severing the Pavlovian link between boredom and smartphone use.
You are methodically rewiring your brain to tolerate the discomfort of a hard problem without immediately seeking an escape hatch.
I love that. You are building the baseline endurance.
But what if baseline isn't enough? What if you need to actively increase the sheer intensity of your focus? That brings us to strategy 2, Roosevelt dashes.
This is essentially high-intensity interval training for the attention centers of your brain.
It's named after Theodore Roosevelt, right?
Yes. When he was an undergraduate at Harvard, his schedule was absurd. He was involved in athletics, naturalist clubs, publishing, socializing. He had very little time for actual studying.
So to maintain his grades, he would artificially compress his study time to force his brain into a state of incredibly intense concentration.
So how does a modern professional execute a Roosevelt dash?
You identify a deep work task that is on your plate. You honestly estimate how long it would normally take you to complete it at your normal, somewhat distracted pace. Let's say it's a report that usually takes 3 hours.
Okay.
Then you set a drastically reduced public deadline.
You walk over to your boss or your client and say, I will have this comprehensive report on your desk in exactly 90 minutes.
Yes, you manufacture a high-stakes crisis. Because the deadline is now so terrifyingly tight, it becomes physically impossible to give in to distraction and still finish the task.
You don't have time to check email. You barely have time to blink.
You are forcing your brain to recruit every available neuron to attack the problem. By doing a Roosevelt dash once a week, you systematically push the ceiling of your maximum cognitive intensity.
You teach your brain how to sprint.
Okay, strategy 3 is a practice that Cal Newport personally utilizes heavily: productive meditation.
This is a fascinating way to reclaim lost time.
The idea is to take a period where you are occupied physically but not mentally, like walking your dog, commuting on the train, or even taking a shower, and focusing your attention solely on a single, well-defined professional problem.
And the mechanics are exactly the same as traditional mindfulness meditation.
In mindfulness, you focus on your breath, and when your mind wanders, you gently bring it back.
In productive meditation, your breath is the professional problem. When your mind inevitably wanders, you notice it, and you redirect your attention back to the problem.
But let me raise a flag here, because I've tried this, and it often goes completely off the rails.
Oh, so?
I'll go for a walk to think about a script, but within 5 minutes, my mind wanders to what I'm having for dinner, or worse, an argument I had with someone 3 years ago.
Classic.
Or, even if I stay on topic, I just end up mentally reciting the surface-level facts of the script over and over again, without actually generating any new insights. I just walk in circles mentally and physically.
That is a very common trap, and the sources specifically warn against what they call looping. Your brain is lazy. It wants to avoid the high energy expenditure of generating deep, novel insights.
Right.
So it will try to trick you by looping over what you already know to feel productive without actually doing the hard work. The key to successful productive meditation is to identify the specific next step question.
A next step question. Break that down for us.
You don't just go for a walk and vaguely think about the project. Before you start walking, you ask, what is the specific unresolved next milestone I need to hit?
Okay, give me an example.
For example, how do I transition smoothly from the Jason Ben story to the neuroscience of myelin? That is a concrete problem. And when you catch your brain leaping back to just summarizing the Jason Ben story, you aggressively redirect your attention back to the specific transition mechanism.
You give your brain a highly precise target to attack.
That distinction makes all the difference. It turns a daydream into a work session.
Finally, we have strategy 4 for training the focus muscle: memory training. Now, this sounds a bit eccentric at first.
A little bit, yeah.
The sources tell the story of Daniel Kiloff. He was a disorganized high school student who struggled with ADD, but he transformed his cognitive abilities, eventually winning medals in the Australian Memory Championships and graduating from university with honors.
And he didn't do it with medication. He did it by training his memory. Specifically, he learned the highly competitive skill of memorizing the exact order of a shuffled deck of playing cards in a matter of minutes.
Now, the goal of this strategy isn't to make you a parlor trick magician to impress your friends. The underlying science here is profound.
Researchers at the University of Washington studied elite memory athletes and found that the biggest physiological difference between them and average people isn't their inherent genetic memory capacity.
No, what is it?
The difference is their attentional control.
Right. The technique they use to memorize cards involves creating a memory palace. You have to mentally walk through your childhood home and vividly imagine placing bizarre images of the cards in different rooms.
To hold those complex, bizarre images in your mind's eye without losing the thread requires an incredibly high, sustained degree of unwavering attention.
By practicing a seemingly unrelated skill like card memorization, you are effectively lifting heavy cognitive weights for your attentional control.
And the incredible thing is that the strengthened focus muscle transfers directly to your professional deep work. If you can focus hard enough to memorize a deck of cards, you can certainly focus hard enough to write a Python script.
Exactly. So let's look at the architecture we've built. We've designed a schedule using a deep work philosophy. We have ritualized our environment to conserve willpower. And we have actively trained the neurological focus muscle using internet blocks, Roosevelt dashes, and productive meditation.
We are biologically and psychologically primed for elite production.
But There is a massive, relentless threat lurking just outside the walls of our eudaimonia machine.
The shallows.
The endless, suffocating tidal wave of emails, status meetings, Slack messages, and social media notifications that are constantly trying to drag us back into the fragmented, low-value work.
Because the reality is you can train your focus all you want, but if you don't aggressively, ruthlessly protect the deep work time you've carved out, it will be consumed by the urgent demands of others.
We have to learn how to drain the shallows.
To protect your depth, you must completely overhaul how you evaluate and adopt network tools. The sources draw a sharp, critical comparison between two distinct approaches to tool selection: the any-benefit mindset versus the craftsman approach.
The any-benefit mindset is the default mode for almost every modern professional. It's the justification we use to download every new app.
We say things like, well, I should be on Twitter because I might randomly see an interesting article relevant to my industry. Or, we should force our team to use this new instant messaging app because it makes it 3 seconds faster to ask a quick question.
The flaw here is that if a tool offers any conceivable macroscopic benefit, we adopt it blindly, completely ignoring the massive, hidden negative cost it levies on our attention, our time, and our cognitive RAM.
It's an economic fallacy. The craftsman approach, on the other hand, asks you to act like a master woodworker selecting tools for their shop.
A woodworker doesn't just buy a tool because it's new and shiny.
They evaluate it strictly against what they are trying to build. In the knowledge work context, you must clearly identify the core factors that determine success and happiness in your professional and personal life.
Then, you only adopt a tool if its positive impacts on those specific core factors substantially and undeniably outweigh its negative impacts.
It's about rigorously applying the law of the vital few, commonly known as the 80-20 rule.
In almost any domain, roughly 80% of your success comes from just 20% of your activities.
If a network tool, like a constantly pinging group chat, isn't significantly driving the top 20% of activities that actually get you promoted, then it is actively stealing time and attention away from them.
Attention is a zero-sum game.
To force yourself to confront this reality, the sources suggest a brilliant, albeit terrifying, experiment inspired by the minimalist author Ryan Nicodemus.
Oh, the packing party.
Yes, it's called a 30-day packing party for your social media and non-essential network tools.
This is the ultimate test of the craftsman approach. You quit cold turkey. But here's the catch. You don't write a long, dramatic post announcing your departure. You don't delete your accounts. You simply stop logging in for 30 days. You vanish.
And after those 30 days are up, you ask yourself 2 brutally honest questions. First, did my life or my career actually suffer in any measurable way because I wasn't using this service?
And second, did anyone actually care or even notice that I was gone?
For the vast majority of people, the answer to both questions is a resounding, humbling no.
The packing party shatters the narcissistic illusion that these tools are vital for your professional existence or your social standing.
It gives you the clarity to permanently abandon the tools that fail the craftsman test.
Once you've ruthlessly audited your tools, you have to audit your daily tasks. Because your boss isn't going to do it for you.
No, they won't.
You need a metric to accurately quantify just how shallow your day-to-day activities really are, so you can start cutting them. The text offers one of the most brilliant heuristics I've ever heard for evaluating your workday. Ask yourself, how many months would it take to train a smart, recent college graduate with absolutely no specialized training in my field to complete this specific task?
That metric is a revelation because it strips away the illusion of busyness.
You'd supply it. Let's say you spend 2 hours every Friday formatting a quarterly PowerPoint report, so the margins line up perfectly. How long would it take to train a smart 22-year-old intern to do that?
Maybe a week of shadowing you.
Therefore, that is a highly shallow task. It completely fails to leverage your hard-won expertise. You are wasting your brain.
But if the task is analyzing a massive data set of consumer behavior to formulate a totally new marketing strategy, it might take that same college grad 50 months of specialized industry training to even understand the variables.
That is deep work. By rigorously quantifying your tasks this way, you create a ledger of your time. You can clearly see exactly where you are wasting your expensive expertise.
And, more importantly, you can take that ledger to your boss and negotiate a shallow work budget.
You can point to the data and say, look, I am currently spending 60% of my time on tasks that a college grad could learn in a week. If I reduce that to 20% and spend the rest of my time on high-level strategy, I will generate significantly more value for this company.
Is having me format slides the best return on investment for my salary?
When you frame it in stark economic terms, most rational bosses will realize the waste and actually help you cull those shallow obligations.
But to force that conversation and to force yourself to actually cull those obligations, you need a hard boundary. The sources introduce a framework called fixed schedule productivity.
The primary case study here is Radhika Nagpal.
Right, a computer science academic who achieved incredible elite success securing tenure at Harvard and publishing her research on the cover of Science magazine by doing something academics almost never do.
She set a firm, non-negotiable cap on her work hours.
She decided she would work exactly 50 hours a week and she would stop working at 5 p.m. every day, no matter what.
When you fix the schedule, you fundamentally alter your psychology. You shift from a mindset of infinite time, where you just let work expand to fill the evening, into a scarcity mindset.
Suddenly, every single request for your time is treated with extreme suspicion.
Because Nagpal knew she had to stop at 5 p.m., she ruthlessly declined shallow committee obligations. She set strict quotas on how many trips she would take a year, and she became incredibly efficient with the hours she did have.
Exactly. The fixed schedule acts as a forcing function. It forces you to prioritize the deep work that actually moves the needle, because you simply don't have the slack in your schedule to wallow in the shallows.
You become fiercely protective of your attention.
And when that fixed deadline hits, when 5:00 p.m. rolls around, you must execute the final, crucial piece of the daily puzzle, the shutdown ritual.
You cannot just casually drift away from your laptop. You must completely psychologically shut down your work mode.
That means no just checking your email after dinner. No mentally replaying stressful meetings while trying to watch a movie. Work is entirely severed until the next morning.
The scientific literature supporting the necessity of a strict shutdown ritual is incredibly robust. It works on 3 distinct psychological levels.
First, it aids unconscious insight. According to unconscious thought theory, researched heavily by psychologist Abdextervis, your conscious mind is actually quite bad at solving highly complex decisions that involve massive amounts of vague, conflicting information.
Your unconscious mind is far better suited to untangle those complex webs.
But, and this is the key, your unconscious mind can only go to work on those problems if your conscious mind steps back, disengages, and rests.
Second, shutting down recharges your directed attention. We talked about willpower being finite. This is formalized in attention restoration theory, formulated by environmental psychologists Rachel and Stephen Kaplan.
Their studies show that engaging in activities that require soft fascination, like taking a walk in nature, having a casual conversation, or simply disengaging from intense cognitive strain, replenishes your finite willpower reserves for the next day.
If you are lying in bed at 9:00 p.m. anxiously answering emails on your phone, you are robbing your brain of that vital biological restoration. You will wake up cognitively depleted.
And finally, the shutdown ritual actively combats the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect. This is a famous psychological phenomenon describing our brain's tendency to fixate on and obsess over incomplete tasks.
If you leave your desk with a dozen half-finished projects swirling in your head, the Zeigarnik effect will ensure you feel a low-level hum of anxiety all night.
However, researchers Roy Baumeister and E.J. Masacampo made a critical discovery. They found that you don't actually have to finish a task to get it off your mind and neutralize the Zeigarnik effect.
You simply have to commit to a highly specific, trusted plan for exactly how and when you will complete it later.
So a proper shutdown ritual isn't just turning off the monitor. It involves taking 10 minutes at the end of the day to review all your open loops. You capture every rogue task, every unanswered email, and you write them down on a master list.
Then you make a rough, concrete plan for how you will tackle them the next day.
Once you externalize those loops into a trusted system, your brain feels safe letting go. You can utter a specific phrase like shut down complete and fully disengage.
You can enjoy your evening, let your unconscious mind untangle the complex problems, and let your willpower regenerate.
It is absolutely amazing how adopting these incredibly strict boundaries, strategic isolation, internet blocks, fixed schedules, and rigid shutdowns, actually creates immense professional freedom and leads to truly elite output.
It's the ultimate paradox of deep work. By radically restricting your options and placing hard boundaries around your time and attention, you set yourself free to produce at your absolute biological peak.
So let's bring this all together. You, our listener, now possess the complete blueprint.
You really do.
You understand the profound economic stakes of the Great Restructuring. You know that to survive and thrive, you must join the ranks of a high-skilled workers by mastering the art of quickly learning hard things and producing at an elite level.
You have seen, through the visceral story of Jason Ben, exactly how strategic isolation can be used to rewire your distracted brain and conquer complex technical skills that accelerate your career.
We've explored the cellular biology of myelin and the cognitive drain of attention residue.
And you now have the practical tools, from designing a eudaimonia-inspired rhythmic schedule and executing Roosevelt dashes, to adopting the craftsman approach and enforcing fixed schedule productivity, to train your focus muscle and brutally drain the shallows from your daily life.
You have the roadmap for career acceleration. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, this is the perfect note to end on.
Throughout this entire deep dive, we have focused almost exclusively on the pragmatic economic benefits of deep work. We've talked about outperforming the competition, learning coding languages, doubling your salary, and securing your place in the modern economy.
But there is a much deeper, almost spiritual, philosophical argument presented in the sources that we shouldn't ignore.
Because it elevates this whole discussion from a productivity hack to a philosophy of life. Go ahead.
Two philosophers, Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Dorrance Kelly, wrote a brilliant book called All Things Shining. They argue that in our hyper-connected, post-Enlightenment modern era, we have fundamentally lost the sense of the sacred in our daily lives.
Everything feels fragmented, superficial, and fleeting.
But they propose a radical solution. They argue that craftsmanship, the meticulous, deeply focused, unwavering dedication to mastering a difficult skill and creating something of true quality, actually brings that sense of meaning and sacredness back into our world.
So when a master woodworker is intently shaping a piece of oak, or when a programmer is deeply, beautifully focused on writing elegant, flawless code in an isolated room, they aren't just being economically productive.
No, they are tapping into a profound, ancient source of human satisfaction.
Exactly. And so the ultimate question is this: what if building a deep work habit isn't just a clever strategy to get a promotion or avoid being replaced by an algorithm?
What if it is actually the biological and philosophical key to a life truly well lived?
What if the ability to focus deeply, to shut out the superficial noise of the digital world, and dedicate yourself entirely to creating something meaningful is precisely what makes us fundamentally human?
Perhaps we are, as the sources elegantly suggest, Homo sapiens depensis, a species that is biologically designed to flourish in depth, but is currently slowly suffocating in the shallows.
That is an incredible, profound thought to carry with you today. We've journeyed from the muddy, blurry landscape of our distracted modern offices back to a place of absolute, crystalline precision.
You now understand the machinery of your own attention.
You have the tools to protect it, to train it, and to aim it at the things that truly matter. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
We challenge you. Don't just passively consume this information.
Pick just one focus strategy today. Schedule your very first 30-minute internet block, or artificially compress a deadline tomorrow morning and run a Roosevelt dash. Take the first step out of the shallows. Until next time, stay focused.